The Daily Podcast is a service of CNC News. It's made possible by the Greece Chamber of Commerce, providing business solutions for more than 800 member companies since 1984. State Attorney General Eric Schneiderman plans to talk more Wednesday about a $13 billion settlement with J.P. Morgan Chase. This is the largest settlement with a single corporation in American history. It resolves federal, state, and civil claims against J.P. Morgan Chase for promoting and selling those mortgage-backed securities, the financial instruments that helped cause the crash of the housing market in 2008 and triggered the recession. As part of the deal, J.P. Morgan Chase admits it knew the securities were risky but didn't tell investors how risky. Schneiderman sued just over a year ago, saying the mortgage-backed securities were a fraud. A working group of state attorneys general and the federal government worked out this settlement with J.P. Morgan Chase. Schneiderman co-chairs the group. The attorney general says New York will get more than $1 billion out of that $13 billion. Some will be in cash, the rest in financial relief to those whose finances were ruined by the collapse of the mortgage market and who need to redo their mortgages. Some advocates say $13 billion is letting the enormous J.P. Morgan Chase Bank off far too lightly. State Comptroller Thomas DiNapoli says New York's on track to spend a record $600 million by the end of the year if it keeps paying overtime at the same rate. DiNapoli says a review of overtime hours by state agencies shows they've already spent $462 million this year. That's a jump of $65 million from the same time a year ago. DiNapoli says reliance on overtime is becoming an expensive habit for the state and should be reduced. He cites 4 agencies as the worst offenders, starting with the Department of Corrections, which has spent nearly $122 million all by itself, and the Department of Transportation comes next at $36 million. The comptroller said that's a 63% increase. The Buffalo Bills fan who put himself and another fan in the hospital when he tried to slide down a stadium railing is not only banned from Ralph Wilson Stadium, he's also out of a job. Rob Hopkins tried to slide down the railing on the 300 level of the stadium during Sunday's game against the Jets, but he fell over backwards, dropped to the deck below, and landed there on top of another fan sitting in the 200 level. Hopkins hurt his shoulder, but the man he landed on suffered a head injury. The advertising agency Eric Mower and Associates says Hopkins was their digital art director, was because they fired him, and now WGRZ TV in Buffalo says the man Hopkins fell on has hired a lawyer. The attorney says right now his client's focus is to make sure this doesn't happen to somebody else. Attorney Charles Desmond says his client is being checked Wednesday by a specialist because he may have suffered a herniated disc after Hopkins flattened him. Hopkins himself has written to the injured man, who's asked to have his name kept out of all this, and he's apologized. 2 men who killed a Rochester teenager while he was waiting in line to buy a pair of designer sneakers have both been given the maximum sentence, 130 years to life in prison. Keyshawn Mackenzie Smith and Williams Wilkins were both convicted of murder and robbery in the death of 19-year-old Montre Bradley. They begin their sentence immediately. Bradley was killed in front of a shoe store on Shiloh Avenue in Gates. He and other young men were standing in line there waiting for the store to open so they could be first to buy the latest Nike designer sneakers. Williams and Mackenzie Smith targeted those men because they knew they'd be carrying a lot of cash. Bradley fought back during the robbery and he was shot down. The Monroe County District Attorney's Office says both men showed incredible lack of respect for life and the community is safer with them in custody for the rest of their lives. A woman accused of faking prescriptions for OxyContin as part of a drug ring has pleaded guilty to grand larceny and other charges. Chantel Williams appeared in city court as part of a state and federal investigation that brought charges against 5 Rochester women. Williams worked for a doctor. She had access to his prescription pad. She's accused of writing 25 prescriptions for the narcotic painkiller and selling them to the other women for cash. Those women then had the prescriptions filled at area pharmacies, and they paid with their Medicaid benefit cards. State Attorney General Eric Schneiderman says altogether they cheated Medicaid and the state out of more than $16,000. Monroe County Legislature Democrats want to know how Republican County Executive Maggie Brooks hired an outside attorney without going through the county's procurement process. Brooks hired former State Attorney General Dennis Vacco to represent the county during the state investigation of the county's local development corporations. And here you see Brooks and Vacco together at a recent news conference. The Democrats say any contract for professional services in excess of $5,000 is supposed to go through the county legislature for approval, and this contract didn't. A Brooks spokesman called the Democratic statements a hollow political attack. Rochester City Councilman Adam McFadden's been elected president of the National Black Caucus of Elected Local Officials. The organization held its annual meeting during the National League of Cities Annual Congress in Seattle, Washington. McFadden says he looks forward to moving the initiatives of the organization forward at the national level. To the left of the player window are links to these and other stories, and at the bottom of the page, if you're on CNC, links that you can use to post news and information directly to us. So the next of these podcasts is As It Happens. Updates are as necessary, and I'm Bud Lowell, CNC News.